Welcome to the YU Library's pre-Shavuot book talk with Rabbi Neil Lauer. Rabbi Lauer received smicha from RIETS, a master's in medieval Jewish philosophy from Revel, and a master's in secondary Jewish education from RIETS. He commutes every workday between his home in Teaneck and his suspender factory in Brooklyn. And now here is Neil Lauer.
Thank you, Shalosh. I know it's been a long day for everyone, so I thought maybe we'd start with a focusing exercise. If you bear with me, let's take our hands. Let's breathe in, and then close them together. Breathe out. Breathe in and out. All right, guys, don't be shy. Everybody join with me. In, out, in, out. We're going to go faster. Okay, technical support, please start recording now. First show the participants and then show me. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Really, it's a surprise. Appreciate that. Unexpected. I don't know if you can see, but I'm blushing. So, okay, so the real point of that exercise was to show how, had the recording actually begun at that time, and someone were to watch the recorded version of the broadcast, the person's perspective on the opening would be distorted because he or she had missed part of the broadcast. And this is a concept that we'll return to in the course of our discussion later. But now we can begin in earnest. My thanks to the YU libraries in general and to Shlomo Hess in specific for inviting me to share some ideas with you tonight. My thanks to JB on the technical side for YU, and my daughter Shani, the technical side here. And I thank all of you for participating. I feel very much at home for obvious reasons. And because, as someone once put it, I've gotten so many degrees from YU that I'm practically running a fever. Although it should be noted that if that were true, it would be of the low-grade variety. I'm grateful that we're not recording this in the library itself because it affords me the opportunity to raise my voice sometimes should the situation warrant it. Sometimes when we're introduced to something at a young age, we take for granted that we know what it's all about when that might not be the case. By way of illustration, not comparison, there are certain stories or catchy songs from our youth which might look very different on re-examination. For example, now that I'm part of the whole literary scene, if for my next project, I pitched an idea to my publisher that I would write a children's book. And the general idea of the book would be that it involves a predator who abducts an infirm elderly woman and then dresses up in the victim's clothes in order to lure in and murder her granddaughter. It's a children's book, though, so we'd have a happy ending where the predator is ultimately killed by a good Samaritan. Now, they may be polite about it, talk about, the need to workshop some of the ideas, but bottom line is, it's quite certain that they would reject that as a pretty awful idea for a children's book. And yet, this is the version of Little Red Riding Hood that I grew up with. At the time, I didn't think anything of the violent nature of this story. And it should be noted that there are actually more violent versions of it. With this as a profane example, we'll now shift our focus to the holy. While almost all the prayers that we are familiar with from the Siddur, from the prayer book, are rabbinic in nature, the Shema, which is arguably the most well-known Jewish prayer, and it's one of the earliest components of the regimen of prayers, is a Torah-level obligation. As such, it is probably one of the first prayers that we learn as children. Most people with some form of Jewish education probably feel they have a good handle on what the Shema represents. This evening, I'd like to challenge that notion. By way of background, the core Torah obligation of Shema consists of either the first sentence or the first paragraph. The balance is seemingly rabbinic, although the Rambam, Maimonides, seems to disagree. But saying the Shema as we have it in its more expansive rabbinic form actually represents the fulfillment of two obligations. The first is what's referred to as accepting the yoke of heaven on oneself, accepting God's dominion over oneself through affirming one's faith in the existence and oneness of God. And the second is remembering the Exodus from Egypt, which is also a Torah level obligation. The makeup of the Shema in its current form, it consists of 3 paragraphs. The first, which is referred to by the first Hebrew words, the Shema v'ahavta, deals with the acceptance, with accepting the existence, the oneness, and the authority of God. The second, which is v'haya im shamoa, deals with accepting the yoke of commandments, along with the related concept of reward and punishment. And the third, vayomer, deals primarily with the mitzvah tzitzis, putting fringes on the corners of 4-cornered garments, but makes a brief yet significant reference to the Exodus from Egypt. It's through this brief statement in the 3rd paragraph that we fulfill our daily obligation to remember the Exodus from Egypt. So now, as efficient as it is to fulfill the obligation to remember the Exodus through reciting the 3rd paragraph of the Shema, a prayer that one was going to say anyway, conceptually, it doesn't seem to fit. Right? What does the Exodus from Egypt have to do with Shema? Joining mention of the Exodus to Shema, it raises a number of questions. The first is, what is Shema all about? So the Shema touches on numerous themes, but what exactly is an affirmation of our belief in God supposed to entail, right? Which is essentially asking, what are the fundamentals of the Jewish faith? Second question is, what does it mean to remember the Exodus? Right? What are we meant to think about when we fulfill the obligation to remember the Exodus? There are extensive discussions in the Torah devoted to the Exodus. What part are we meant to bring to mind when we read that one line in Shema that refers to the Exodus? Thirdly, how does remember the Exodus relate to the rest of the Shema? On the surface, it seems like a non sequitur, perhaps more, legal than thematic, right? Its placement there, I understand that I fulfill an obligation, but thematically, what is it doing in the Shema? And then fourthly, why use the specific text regarding the tzitzis to facilitate remembering the Exodus? There are numerous portions in the Torah that discuss the Exodus at length. And then on top of that, there are many, many references to the Exodus in the Torah. Why specifically did the rabbis include the portion on tzitzis, a part of Shema, to facilitate our remembering the Exodus from Egypt? So a key to understanding and uncovering answers lies in a little known fact that there was a degree of fluidity regarding the Shema's composition. You might be surprised to learn that both Talmuds, the Talmud of Bavli and Yerushalmi, teach us that the Shema originally had 4 paragraphs, and one of them was removed, and that there was another portion that was almost added to it, but was ultimately left out. Now, before we talk specifics, let's take a step back. We are now in the period between Pesach, which commemorates the Exodus, and Shavuos, which commemorates the giving of the Torah, the day that the 10 Commandments were articulated at Har Sinai, at Mount Sinai. As opposed to the Exodus, which, as discussed, we have a daily obligation to mention, the portion of the 10 Commandments, which, while certainly one of the more iconic portions of the Torah, is surprisingly not part of our current prayer service. Now, it should be mentioned that according to some, there is an obligation to remember the revelation at Sinai, but that may be an annual one. So I think that, if the one of the portions that if you would ask somebody, do they think that it would be in the prayer book? I think that the 10 Commandments is one of those portions that someone would say, oh, for sure, it must be there. And so one might be gratified to know that the 10 Commandments were once part of the prayers. The paragraph of the Shema that was eventually removed was none other than the portion of the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments were originally included as part of the Shema, but that practice was later suspended on account of heretics who ascribed too much significance to them. So the fact that the 10 Commandments were actually, at some point part of Shema raises its own issue. One might expect to see the 10 Commandments as part of the prayer service, but one would likely not expect to see them as part of the Shema. But how now we have a new question. How does the 10 Commandments fit in with the Shema? So the fact that 2 of the original 4 paragraphs of the Shema, the current 3rd paragraph, which deals with tzitzis and mentions the Exodus, and the one that was removed, the Ten Commandments, that don't seem to fit with our general conception of what the Shema is all about, raises the question of how does the Shema, in its more expansive rabbinic form, speak to the fundamentals of faith in God? Right? What do the other paragraphs accomplish that the first doesn't? So to answer this, we need to look at another question. Why were the Ten Commandments removed? Both Talmuds explain that the Ten Commandments were removed from the Shema because of a heresy that surrounded them. But the Talmud Yerushalmi gives some more detail. It explains that there were those who emphasized the legal significance of the Ten Commandments to the exclusion of the rest of the Torah. So that begs the question, or raises the question, that the Ten Commandments are clearly special in some way. Right? The question is how? If the uniqueness isn't their legal status, then what is it? The tripod, in the tripod, I develop a framework based on classical sources for addressing all the issues that we've raised. In it, I discuss how there are two dimensions to the Exodus, the physical and the conceptual. The physical, the fact that we were freed from physical slavery, the hardships of slavery, and conceptual freedom, where we were freed intellectually and elevated spiritually, allowing us to develop our relationship with God as a nation. The 10 plagues that God inflicted on the Egyptians were not necessary to secure our physical release from slavery. One would have been enough. So the question becomes, what then was the purpose of the 10 plagues? We're familiar with a teaching of Rabbi Yehuda that we state in the Haggadah, that Rabbi Yehuda gave the plagues simanim. He made an acronym for the plagues: Nitzach, Adash, Ba'achav. So the question is, what does that represent? Is it simply just an acronym, or is there more to it? And the commentators explain that if you take a look at the discussion in the Torah of the 10 plagues, you can see that there are patterns within the plagues, and they actually divide up into those 3 units. And that the Tzach, Adash, Ba'achav, which are the first letters of the Hebrew names for the various plagues, represents the fact that there are 3 units within the plagues, and that those 3 units teach fundamental concepts. So it's the plagues actually represent 3 different lessons about God. There's different formulations given for those lessons. In the book, I use existence, God's existence, as the first, providence as the second, God's active involvement in the world, and prophecy, the fact that God communicates his will to humanity. So when viewed from this perspective, 2 out of the 3 fundamental lessons of the Exodus are represented within the Shema. Right? You have God's existence, which is affirmed in the Shema, in the first paragraph, Shema v'ahavta. You have providence, the fact that God's active involvement in the world, which is reflected in V'haya im Shamoa, the second paragraph, which talks about reward and punishment. And so we have 2 of those 3 fundamental principles discussed within the Shema. But now, based on the fact that we understand that there was a paragraph that was removed at some point, when you add in the missing component to the equation, you realize that the expanded version of the Shema covers all 3 concepts, not just the first 2. We said that the third concept is prophecy, and the original 4th paragraph of Shema, being the 10 Commandments, represents the national revelation at Sinai, and so the 10 Commandments epitomize prophecy. So in fact, right, the 10 Commandments relates to the 3rd fundamental concept, and in its ideal form, Shema relates to all 3 of the fundamental principles taught during the Exodus: existence, providence, and prophecy. What was unique about the giving of the Torah was the fact that it wasn't given to an individual, but rather to the entire nation of Israel, and that everyone experienced prophecy to a degree. And so we can now appreciate the fact that our understanding of Shema was lacking because we were missing a part of it. And the Ten Commandments representing within the Shema, the concept of prophecy, is supported by the portion's proposed substitution. I mentioned before that there was a portion that the rabbis had considered adding into the Shema that they ultimately rejected. So there, the Gemara in Brachos, the Talmud in Brachos, page 12, discusses how the sages had considered adding part of Parshas Balak into the Shema. So what happened is that Balak, the king of Moab, was concerned about the Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel, heading his way towards the land of Israel. And so he hired Bilam, a non-Jewish prophet, to curse the Jewish people. And what ends up happening is that God puts a blessing in Bilam's mouth instead. And so the sages had considered putting some of those verses into the Shema. And the question is presumably, right, they were putting this portion in as a substitution for the Ten Commandments that were taken out. So if the idea is that the Ten Commandments represented prophecy, and Parshas Balak, part of Parshas Balak was the portion of Balak was proposed as a substitution, the question is why would that be an appropriate substitution? So I think that of all portions, Parshas Balak does epitomize prophecy for two reasons that I can think of. The first is the fact that, but for prophecy, we would not have known about Parshas Balak. It takes place out of the view of the Bnei Yisrael. This all takes place where the enemies of the Bnei Yisrael are plotting against them, and we had no knowledge of it at the time. So the fact that that Parshas Balak is in the Torah is really a credit to prophecy. It's interesting that according to some of the commentators, many understand that the details were later confirmed in court before Bilam was killed. So that's one idea in terms of how Parshas Balak would epitomize prophecy. The other is that it's the only example I can think of a compelled prophecy. Remember, Bilam wanted to curse the Bnei Yisrael, but God forced him to bless them. So God puts words in Bilam's mouth. And so in that way also, it epitomizes this construct of prophecy. It's interesting also that the Ten Commandments were later reintroduced into the prayers. So there are some individuals, and you'll look at the back of the prayer book, in the back of the siddur, in the back of chakras, the morning prayers, there are some who voluntarily read the portion of the Ten Commandments every day after morning prayers. But on a communal level, the Ten Commandments made their way back into the prayers through piyutim, which are liturgical poems. There are some liturgical poems that focus purely on the Ten Commandments, but there's an entire genre of piyutim that are called azharos. And azharos were traditionally read on Shavuot, where the construct of the azharos is that each of the 613 mitzvot. So the tradition is that there are 613 mitzvot, and the question becomes, which of the mitzvot qualify as part of the 613, and that is debated within rabbinic literature. So the given author would use the list of 613 that he subscribed to, and he would take each of the 613 mitzvot and group it under one of the 10 commandments. And so he would categorize the 613 mitzvot right under the headings of the 10 commandments. So this is a fascinating construct, because we can see that in this way they were combating the heresy of the past by showing the connection to all Torah laws that all Torah laws have to each other. So it was this notion that it's not that the 10 commandments are legally binding and the rest of the Torah isn't. It's the fact that the 10 commandments represent the rest of the mitzvos, and that all the other mitzvos can really be filed under the 10 commandments as representing headings that would relate to the rest of the mitzvos. And this also highlights the relationship between the 10 commandments and the rest of the mitzvos, in that the Ten Commandments of the revelation at Sinai, it provides the concept, it proves the concept of revelation, which is the conceptual basis for all mitzvah observance. So once one appreciates how the fundamentals of Judaism were first taught during the Exodus, and that the Shema is meant to discuss the fundamentals of Judaism, it makes perfect sense that we would fulfill our obligation to remember the Exodus through saying the Shema. So what seemed to be a complete non sequitur of having the Shema, the Exodus, mentioned in the Shema actually fits very nicely. Once we have that missing piece of the Ten Commandments, we can then complete the puzzle and understand how remembering the Exodus fits very nicely. It also answers the question in terms of, we raised the issue before, in terms of when we say that we're meant to remember the Exodus, when we're saying the Shema, what aspect of the Exodus are we meant to remember? It would seem that because it was placed in the Shema, the reference to the Exodus, what we're supposed to remember are the concepts that emerged, the lessons learned, not the physical history. Interestingly, I do believe that a strong argument can be made that the physical elements of the Exodus are discussed and commemorated elsewhere in the prayer service. But what is I think that a strong argument can be made that the reference in the Shema refers to the conceptual elements of the Exodus and not the physical. This is not interesting. This is not the only place that the Shema is linked to the Exodus. The first two paragraphs of the Shema are included in the tefillin, the phylacteries, which the Torah tells us also serve as a commemoration of the Exodus. The tefillin, with its two components, the head and the arm, and it has four passages in it. So the phylacteries inside the boxes, there are four portions inside, two groups of two, if you will. The Shema and the Hayim Shemoah, that's the first two paragraphs of the Shema, and Kaddish Li and V'haya ki v'yacha, which are portions taken from the portion of Bo, which is within the discussion of the Exodus itself in the Torah. And I think that perhaps a discussion for another time, but I think that an argument can be made that the tefillin, with its two components and two groups of two portions, can be said to represent both the physical and the conceptual elements of the Exodus. You have the head, the mind, you have the arm, the body, in terms of action, and Shema v'haya im shemoah clearly deal with the conceptual, as opposed to Kaddish Li and V'haya ki v'yacha, which deal more with the physical. The fact, though, that once we appreciate the fact that the Ten Commandments were once part of the Shema, and now the Shema is missing a core element with seemingly with no vestige of it left, it raises the issue now, isn't the Shema severely lacking? And what I would say to that is that the situation deteriorated over time. Originally, the Talmud tells us that even after they stopped saying including the Ten Commandments within Shema in general, it was still said within the temple. It was when Shema was said in the temple, the Ten Commandments were included in that Shema. And what happened, though, eventually, though, when the temple was destroyed, the institution of Kriya Shema, like many other institutions within Judaism, was left lacking. But that was something gradual that, at least originally, when they took the paragraph out, it was still in the people's consciousness. Secondly, there is still a link to the Ten Commandments. The Talmud Yerushalmi says that all 10 commandments are alluded to in the other three paragraphs of the Shema, and it goes on to list the different allusions. The only issue is that in time, because we lost sight of the fact that the Ten Commandments were once part of the Shema, you can't be reminded of something that you didn't know about in the first place. And so, yes, it's true that over time, this element has become lost, and hopefully now we will, now that we're conscious of it, it's something that we'll consider once we say the Shema every day. So we saw that adding in the missing piece was very helpful in trying to understand what the Shema is all about. And as enlightening as considering the missing component may be, it doesn't resolve all our issues. We still need to understand the portions that we have. So back to the question of how does tzitzis fall into all this? How does it connect to the Shema? We are told that in the third paragraph of the Shema, that the function of tzitzis are to generate an awareness of the mitzvot, meant to lead to our fulfilling the mitzvot. So the question is, what is the relationship between the mitzvot and the Exodus, right? The third paragraph, we mentioned tzitzis and we mentioned the Exodus. So the question is, how are those two related? Seemingly, if you talking about fulfilling the mitzvos, it shouldn't be linked to the Exodus. It should be linked to the revelation at Sinai. So I think that the message there is that the Exodus taught the conceptual foundation for keeping the mitzvos, for keeping the commandments. And when the Torah says that a person should, look at the tzitzis and remember the mitzvos, it can't be relating to the specific mitzvos. I mean, you briefly look at tzitzis, maybe you're going to think of 350, maybe 375, but you're not going to think of 613 mitzvahs. You know what I mean? But so I think that when we say that you look at the tzitzis, you remember the mitzvahs, we're talking about the concept of mitzvah observance, a concept which, as we said, is strongly linked to the fundamentals of Judaism, and which is part and parcel of what the Exodus was teaching us. And this fits in very nicely. There's a Medrash Agada, which explains that the focal point of the tzitzis, the techeles, so they're ideally within the tzitzis, you had white strings and then one blue string. And the Medrash says that based on a play on words, is that the techeles represents the tachlis, the ultimate driving force of the world, God, and specifically, I guess, God's role as the originator of the mitzvahs, so the being that commanded us the mitzvahs. I would like to suggest that the inclusion of the tzitzis in Shema is actually very telling regarding the composition and function of the Shema. When looked at from a textual perspective, the combination of the portions in the Shema is an act of medrash. That when the sages put the portion of tzitzis along with the other two paragraphs of the Shema, they were making a connection. And at least to me, on the surface, the connection isn't obvious. The first two paragraphs are clearly related, right? They both talk about fundamental concepts, the oneness of God, the existence of God, reward and punishment. But the third paragraph seems to come out of nowhere. Again, it focuses on the mitzvah of tzitzis. So I think that the common thread of the three paragraphs is that the discussions include a combination of concepts and symbols. We talked about so far the concepts discussed in the Shema, but that's not all that the Shema talks about. The first two paragraphs discuss both concepts, as we said, God's existence and ongoing active role in the world. But it also talks about reminders meant to bring the concepts to mind, namely tefillin, phylacteries, and mezuzot. So we know, generally speaking, what these symbols are meant to remind us of because they both involve text. As we mentioned before, the phylacteries include 4 portions inside of them, and the mezuzah also has a text inside the case. So interestingly, though, those texts are not accessible, right? So they're not meant for study. The box on the tefillin are the boxes are sealed, and in terms of the mezuzah, it's generally protected from the elements, so it's also sealed. So, but at some point, then the representation that these symbols have has to be articulated. I can't be reminded of something that I was never familiar with in the first place, and I think that the Shema serves that role. The Shema serves to articulate the symbolism of tefillin and mezuzot. Now the question is, though, how does the portion regarding tzitzis fit in? So I guess you could say that, well, it checks off both boxes. It includes a symbolic reminder, the tzitzis, as well as the concept of the significance of the Exodus. And so, okay, we have our reminder coupled with a major concept. The difference is, though, is that tzitzis is a different type of reminder. There's no text involved with tzitzis. It's just a series of strings. So where is the uniting principle that led the sages to join these three portions? How is tzitzis meant to strike a chord? Okay, so to answer this, we'll need to take a trip into left field. Back in the day, when we as a people enjoyed a closer relationship with God, God would sometimes send a person a message that he or she had a spiritual problem that needed to be remedied. And that came in the form of tzaras. Tzaras is often translated in translation of the Bible as leprosy. Not the best translation, but generally, because it came in the form of tzaras as an illness, not genetically linked, but spiritually linked. And the Torah goes on in terms of great detail to tell us the different forms that tzaras took and the program for resolving it. The Torah explains to us that there were 4 different types of tzaras: of the body, the head, the house, and garments. And some explain that these served as indication of 4 different types of spiritual issues. And so this was God sending the person a message, and some of the commentators explain that it was a detailed message depending on what type of tzaras the person got. And the point of tzaras was for a person to take note of this message that God was sending him or her, and go through a process which involved a lot of self-introspection and repairing their relationship with God. And it certainly is a gift to be sent a message from God about problems, even if that message comes with an uncomfortable malady. But the question is, though, where is the program for preventing these problems in the first place? And I think that there are actually a series of reminders of proper beliefs and behaviors that the Torah has as part of the program. There's the tefillin, which has 2 parts, the body and the head. And then there's the mezuzah, right? That is a reminder on one's home. So now what's missing, right? We said that of the tzaras, you have on the body, the head, the home, and garments. So what's the Torah's garment-related reminder? Tzitzis. So through the composition of the Shema, I think that the sages are communicating to us that the tzitzis are the missing piece to the program set out in the first 2 paragraphs. The reminders are meant to facilitate an awareness that will help prevent spiritual mishap. So, okay, but let's say I don't engage with these objects, or I may not even see them on a regular basis. So doesn't that undermine the program? So I think that that's where the daily recital of Shema comes into play. So even if we don't see the actual reminder, we read about them, right? And we have this concept elsewhere where sometimes if we can't engage in a certain ritual, we read about it. So I think that the awareness generated by the physical reminders is brief. It's visceral even. It's the modern equivalent of the wallpaper picture on one's phone. Right? When you log into your phone, well, if you so choose, unless you have the defaults. But I'm saying, very many people set a picture there, which you see very briefly before continuing on to do whatever it is you're going to do. So a lot of these reminders can have a very brief, although obviously back in the day, tefillin were meant to be worn all day. But I think though for onlookers, the reminder could be very brief. And I think that the Shema is also meant to be relatively brief with a lot packed into it, which is why, interestingly, we said that the portion of Balak was rejected from being added into the Shema. And the reason that the Gemara gives is that it would be too long, which is interesting because based on today's standards in terms of the length of prayer, I don't know that it represents that long of a portion. But it was interesting that the sages that says that no, it was too long, indicating the fact that Shema is meant to be brief with a lot packed into it. And I think that this perspective yields another connection between the Exodus and Tzitzis, is that both speak to preventing the negative impact from one's surroundings. The Tzitzis, it's not on your body, it's not on your home, right? So what is it? It's what envelops you. It's what surrounds you. It's on your garments, it's on your clothing. As we said, that a major function of the Exodus was the fact that and when God took us out of Egypt, it freed us spiritually and intellectually, where we were taken away from influences that really served to distance us from God. So, okay, so this evening what we discussed was that the fact that Shema is all about affirming fundamental concepts. We had formulated them as existence, providence, and prophecy. We also noted that the function of the Shema comes into full light when considering its missing component, the Ten Commandments. And with the awareness of the fact that the Ten Commandments were once part of the Shema, Shema now becomes an example of an institution within Judaism with a missing component, which is an unfortunate condition of the exile, that there are numerous components of Judaism, particularly after the destruction of the temple, that are now missing components. We discussed how the fundamental concepts of Judaism were first taught during the Exodus through the vehicle of the 10 plagues, and that we noted that the expanded version of Shema is meant to include all three concepts represented by the Exodus, which makes the Shema an appropriate forum for remembering the Exodus. And one implication of our discussion is that the intended takeaway from the Exodus and what we are instructed to remind ourselves of every day is seemingly the fundamental principles of Judaism, as opposed to the physical element. And that all elements of the Shema in its ideal form, both the concepts and the reminders, speak to the fundamentals of Judaism. That the Shema provides the concepts behind the various physical reminders in Judaism, tefillin, mezuzos, tzitzos, as well as the Exodus. And it serves to invest the symbols with meaning. We also noted how the Shema itself serves as an important reminder of these fundamentals. The various reminders together with the Shema itself can be viewed as serving as a program for avoiding spiritual pitfalls, if you will, not getting taras, or in our case, not deserving taras. I hope that our discussion tonight has in some way enhanced your appreciation of some of the fundamental aspects of Jewish practice. And if anyone is interested, the tripod is available online through Amazon, Mosaica, Feldheim, various online retailers, and in Jewish bookstores. My thanks again for your participation.
Okay, thank you so much. I neglected to mention at the start that you could put your questions in the chat. However, some people already did put their questions, so thank you. I'm going to read them out loud. One of the questions asked was, is Shabbos mentioned in the Shema, considering that Shabbos is central to Jewish observance?
So that's interesting. So Shema, so the Shabbos is also considered to have a symbolic value in addition to its legal value, but no, it's I would say that the Shema is not it's not a value. It's really more a vehicle for conveying important values, and being that it does have a symbolic component, but not the type of physical reminders that are discussed in the Shema.
Okay. The Shema seems to have no allusion to mitzvos bein adam lechavero, mitzvos between man and man, which the Aseres HaDibros do. Doesn't that make it more difficult to connect the two?
That's a very interesting question.
My husband asked it. That's why it was interesting.
I don't know. That's something I have to think about in terms of the because right, it's very God-centered Shema, and as opposed to the Aseres Adibros, the Ten Commandments, which have both. That's very interesting. All right, something to think about. So I guess also that's something now that it's an element of the Shema that I guess that was in the Shema that's now missing from it. But it's a very interesting perspective, and something to think about.
Right. Would the tzitzis, you mentioned about the tzitzis bringing out spiritual, I forgot how you worded it. Would it that also engender sexual immorality? Being against, reminding people about sexual immorality.
So in general, as well as that the tzitzis are meant to lead us from following our what's formulated in the text as our eyes and our heart, right? So it's to not stray in various ways, to chase after more animalistic base drives, which I think certainly would include that. And so yes, it's to remind us of mitzvos, and that's also an interesting point in terms of not following certain drives and reminding us of the mitzvos. But those two things can be very much related, is that the mitzvos are also meant to channel our attentions and our energies in a positive way, as opposed to being led in other directions.
Okay. Somebody made a suggestion to my husband, to David's question, a possible suggestion, that our relationships with others prepare us and regulate us for a proper relationship with Hashem.
Interesting idea.
And our relationships, yeah. So something to think about.
It's also right. I mean, I guess an interesting idea in terms of that it's when we begin with Shema Yisrael, that we're talking about us as a group. Before we talk about God, we're acknowledging our membership in the group. Again, something to think about. Hadn't thought about it before, so I don't want to answer off the top.
Okay, well, we could always email the group. I had a question. You had mentioned way back that there are various allusions to the Ten Commandments in the Shema. So I know you kind of cover that directly, but like, what are actual allusions are you referring to?
So the Talmud Yerushalmi, it picks out different formulations used within the Shema and ascribes them as referencing the Ten Commandments. So it does give a full listing there, and that's in 1.5, the Yerushalmi Brachos, and you can see there how it develops this idea. Now, it's the type of thing where we wouldn't have seen that on our own, and it doesn't jump out at you. It's really that the Yerushalmi is creating that association, and then once they put an idea in our head, so then it would serve to remind us in the future.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you everybody for participating. This is very enlightening for me. Oh wait, we have something popping in. Oh, somebody said thank you so much for a wonderful share. I will be sending everybody a link to the recording once we have that ready. Is there anything else you want to ask? Please feel free to email it to me. I can forward it over to Rabbi Lauer. And thank you very much.
Thank you all. Appreciate it very much.